Narrator. I took in the discarded daughter of my biggest corporate rival. My plan was ruthless. Train her, use her as a pawn for my revenge, and then discard her. It was going to be easy. I have no heart for strays. 10 years later, her biological family finally tracked us down at a high-end corporate gala. I was standing in the corner, holding a cheap cup of instant coffee. Her biological parents marched in with a dozen bodyguards, dripping in designer brands and arrogance. Her father looked me up and down with disgust. Thanks for keeping our true heiress alive. We will take it from here. The fake daughter they had raised in her place, Ju Bin, shrank behind him, looking pitifully at Ha Wu. Sister, Ju Bin said, her voice trembling with fake sweetness. Please do not hate me for taking your place. It breaks my heart to see you living like this, clinging to a man who clearly cannot provide, and frankly, your daughter's whining is disrupting the ambience I paid $90 million for. Ju Bin's jaw dropped. The platinum card slipped from her fingers and clattered loudly onto the marble floor. Ju Bin, her arrogant brother, turned a deep shade of purple, choking on his own spit. Their billionaire father looked like he had been struck by lightning. Ha Wu smiled brightly, tightening her grip on my arm. Now, if you will excuse us, my dad wants a crab puff, and if they get cold, I will have to fire the catering staff. Have a lovely evening, guests. As we walked away, leaving them frozen in humiliation, I kept my face entirely expressionless. I am a mastermind. I am a monster. But internally, I had to bite the inside of my cheek to stop myself from grinning. She was an absolute menace, a flawless corporate weapon. My evil plan was working perfectly. 10 years ago, I did not just stumble across my asset. I spent millions tracking a trail of hush money to a miserable, off-the-grid orphanage by the docks. Her biological parents, those high society elites dripping in wealth but morally bankrupt, had thrown Ha Wu away to hide a scandal. They had replaced her with Ju Bin, their delicate, doe-eyed fake heiress. I went to that orphanage to claim their discarded trash. I dragged this feral, glaring 8-year-old into my penthouse. My plan was to forge her into a weapon. I slammed a 500-page corporate law textbook on her desk. Memorize the first chapter by tomorrow, I sneered, giving her my most dangerous glare. Or I throw you back to the streets. It was a display of brutal training. But that night, I paced outside her door for hours, sweating. What if she could not read? What if I had traumatized her? At 2 in the morning, my cold, villainous exterior completely cracked. I panicked, grabbed a plate of premium Wagyu beef, and kicked her door open, fully prepared to apologize. She was not crying. She was sitting on the floor using the heavy textbook as a mouse bed while playing a stock market simulator on my laptop. She looked up, wiped her nose, and smirked. Chapter 1 is outdated, she said. Also, I just shorted your rival's tech stock. You owe me $20. I handed her the Wagyu beef and quietly closed the door, my actual soft-hearted actions betraying my monologue. Perfect, I whispered to myself, wiping away a proud tear. My evil plan is working. My staff thought I was a cold-blooded mastermind. Yuna, my operations chief, who was intimidatingly flawless with her long, silky white hair and silver-rimmed glasses, treated everything with complete corporate seriousness. I would have to keep my new soft-hearted reality a secret from them until the paper-crowned fortress incident. One night, I was supposed to be preparing for a hostile takeover. Instead, I was in the library, lying on the floor, helping Ha Wu build a massive fortress out of proprietary financial reports. Suddenly, the heavy double doors swung open. Yuna marched in with a stack of urgent contracts. Min followed close behind, scanning the room for threats. They stopped dead. The scene was disastrous for my reputation. I, the man with a perpetually tired, dangerous aura, was on all fours wearing a ridiculous paper crown. Sir, Yuna said, pushing her silver-rimmed glasses up her nose. The board is waiting, and why is the asset wearing your executive watch as a bracelet? I scrambled up, trying to hide a glue stick behind my back. I cleared my throat, returning to my deepest, most villainous voice. I am auditing her ability to construct complex structures under pressure. It is a test of architectural spatial awareness. Hawu did not even look up from the fortress. And the crown? Is that a test too, boss? Yuna stared at me for a long, silent moment. She knew exactly what was going on. Instead of lecturing me, she adjusted her glasses, looked at Min, and nodded toward the door. Understood. Min locked the doors. If anyone from the board approaches, tell them the chairman is busy auditing. Min, despite his terrifying appearance, happily participated in her childhood games. He grinned, leaning against the door. Copy that. Should I bring in some extra building supplies, sir? I think this tower needs a stronger foundation. The years passed, and my corporate weapon was forged. The truth of what we had built together did not fully hit me until she was 17. We were at a shareholder dinner, and an arrogant, older board member decided to make a scene insulting me and calling Hawu a stray. I tightened my grip on my glass, ready to signal Min for physical trash removal. But before I could move, Hawu stepped in front of me. She was wearing a sharp blazer, her messy high ponytail shifting as she stared the man down. Property value is an interesting topic, Director Lee, Hawu said, deadly calm under pressure. Especially since I was reviewing the shell companies holding your offshore assets this morning. Did your wife know you used the company's pension fund to buy a yacht? The room went dead silent. Director Lee turned pale. You have 30 seconds to apologize to my father, resign your board seat, and leave, she stated, using raw data and financial dominance rather than emotion to destroy her enemy. He ran out of the room. He was professionally destroyed. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to stop myself from weeping with pride. She was not just a pawn anymore. She was my daughter. The biological family's first desperate retaliation came in the form of public relations. They could not beat us in the boardroom, so they decided to use dirty politics and public relations traps, exactly the kind of tactics they relied on. They cornered Hawu and me outside our headquarters, bringing a swarm of reporters with them. Flashing cameras and shoved microphones completely blocked our path to the street. Right in the center of the chaos, playing the victim, was Ju Bin. She was weeping beautifully for the cameras, supported by her morally bankrupt biological parents. They were deliberately trying to frame me as a kidnapper who had isolated their true daughter and poisoned her mind against her real family. We just want our sister back, Ju Bin cried out to a reporter, dabbing at her dry eyes. That man kept her isolated. She does not even know we have been crying for her every day. The trap was flawlessly designed. If I signaled men to physically clear the crowd, I would look exactly like the controlling monster they claimed I was. If Hawu yelled at them, she would be painted as an ungrateful, heartless daughter on national television. But there is a golden rule in our household. The victim always loses. Hawu did not get emotional. She bypassed emotion entirely, remaining deadly calm under pressure. She stepped forward, ignoring the microphones shoved in her face, and pulled a small flash drive from her pocket. My biological family is devastated. That is tragic, Hawu said, her voice carrying cleanly over the noise of the press. I assume that is why my biological father's primary political backer transferred $40 million into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands last Tuesday. The camera flashes abruptly stopped. The reporters lowered their microphones, looking confused. The biological father, standing behind his fake weeping daughter, went entirely rigid. Or perhaps the tears are because this morning, I anonymously submitted proof to the tax board that this very same political ally is running a shell corporation to evade corporate taxes. Hawu continued, holding up the flash drive for the cameras. She checked her watch, her expression turning strictly professional. The audit begins in exactly 4 minutes. If you reporters hurry, you can catch the federal agents raiding their political backers' offices live on air. Hawu had just leaked the offshore accounts and tax fraud of their primary political backer on live television. It was a brilliant, calculated strike. The leak prompted an immediate federal raid on their ally, completely cutting off the biological family's political armor and humiliating them in front of the entire country. Yet by targeting the backer instead of the biological father himself, she left his core professional and kept him legally intact for the next phase of our war. The journalists did not hesitate for a single second. The mob instantly pivoted away from us, swarming the biological father and screaming questions about his corrupt political connections. Jubin's fake tears dried up instantly as she desperately screamed for their bodyguards to protect them from the cameras. Hawu did not even watch them scramble. She turned to me, her mischievous smile returning, and linked her arm through mine. The public relations trap was a good play, boss, she whispered to me as we walked to our car. But they forgot one thing. You did not raise a victim. You raised a corporate weapon. I kept my face entirely expressionless, nodding once as if this was all part of my grand, evil design. But inside, I was absolutely beaming. I was raising the most terrifying woman in the financial sector, and I could not have been prouder. With their public image heavily damaged by the media ambush, desperation began to rot the biological family from the inside. Jubin, terrified of losing her collapsing fake heiress lifestyle, decided to take matters into her own hands. Backed into a corner, her greed pushed her to make a remarkably stupid mistake. She attempted a desperate backdoor infiltration of our company. Jubin did not have the skills to hack us herself, so she targeted someone she thought was weak. She cornered Mina, an internal operations employee who maintained a seemingly easily manipulated low-level demeanor. Mina looked like a quiet, harmless worker who would do anything for a quick payout. Jubin slid a thick envelope of cash across a cafe table, attempting to bribe Mina to plug a compromised flash drive directly into our servers. She promised a lifetime of wealth in exchange for stealing our proprietary data. Mina, playing the part perfectly, gave a nervous nod, took the drive, and hurried back to the secure floors of our headquarters. What the fake heiress did not know was that Mina used her unassuming demeanor specifically to act as Hawu's inside agent for digital traps. Mina was entirely loyal to our found family, and she acted mischievously when she let someone get close to her. The moment Mina entered my executive office, she dropped the nervous act completely. She tossed the flash drive onto Hawu's desk with a mischievous grin. She actually bought it. Mina laughed, leaning against the doorframe. She thinks I am going to upload her little virus. Do I plug it into the sandbox server? Hawu smirked, her eyes gleaming with cold calculation. Mina had been acting on Hawu's orders the entire time. Plug it in, Hawu commanded. But instead of stealing our data, the flash drive deployed a targeted malware that Hawu had specifically crafted for this exact moment. The virus traveled straight back through the flash drive's connection protocol, hunting down its original source. Later that evening, Jubin returned to the biological family's mansion, waiting eagerly to receive the stolen data that would save her status. She opened her laptop and unlocked her phone, expecting a triumphant victory. Instead, every screen she owned flashed a blinding red. The targeted malware executed its mission flawlessly. Jubin found herself permanently locked out of every single one of her luxury bank accounts. Her exclusive credit cards were frozen, her digital wallets were locked, and her private credentials were scrambled. As she frantically hammered on her keyboard, a mocking digital message popped up simultaneously on her phone and her laptop. Better luck next time, sister. Try not to drop your credit cards, Jubin screamed, hurling her useless phone across her expensive bedroom. She was a manipulator who relied entirely on stolen wealth to maintain her facade, and in one swift move, my corporate weapon had severed her lifeline completely. The biological family was running out of options, and my absolute dominance over them was becoming undeniable. The biological father was a man who believed his wealth made him invincible. He was used to relying on dirty politics and brute financial force to get whatever he wanted. With his public image damaged from the media ambush, he decided to strike back using his remaining high society and political connections. He foolishly believed he could back me into a corner and force my hand. I was sitting in my executive office, reviewing quarterly reports when the heavy oak doors swung open. The biological father marched in without an appointment, radiating absolute arrogance. He did not bring his bodyguards this time. He believed his political capital was all the armor he needed. He planted both hands firmly on my polished mahogany desk, leaning forward to issue his grand ultimatum. I have frozen your supply chains, the biological father snarled, his face twisted into an ugly, triumphant sneer. every shipping lane, and every warehouse contract. My political allies have locked you out completely. Your company will bleed millions by tomorrow morning. He stood up straight, adjusting his expensive silk tie, waiting for me to panic. I will only lift the blockade if Hawu is returned to us immediately, he demanded, his voice echoing in the quiet office. He thought he had outsmarted me. He thought he had found the one weakness in my armor. But there is a golden rule in this corporate war: I am always a mastermind. I am never a bystander in my own story, and I anticipate every possible move my enemies might make. I leaned back in my heavy leather chair. I looked at his red, desperate face, and I simply laughed. I did not just chuckle. I let out a deep, cold laugh that made the billionaire flinch. "UNA," I called out casually, not taking my eyes off the man in front of me. My operations chief stepped out from the adjacent boardroom, intimidatingly flawless in her immaculate white business suit. She brushed a strand of long, silky white hair over her shoulder and pushed her silver-rimmed glasses up her nose. She did not say a word at first. She simply walked over and handed the biological father a freshly printed, heavily stamped legal document. "What is this?" he demanded, snatching the thick stack of paper from her perfectly manicured hand. "That is a deed of corporate acquisition," UNA explained, her tone completely deadpan and hypercompetent. "We acquired the controlling shares of those supply chains at midnight last night. Your freeze order was issued to companies that now belong to us. You essentially tried to blockade us using our own subsidiaries." I watched with immense satisfaction as the color completely drained from the biological father's face. I had revealed through UNA that I had already bought out the primary suppliers the night before, making his ultimate threat entirely useless. My mastermind strategy had easily bypassed the freeze before he even walked into the building. "You cannot win this war," I told him, dropping my voice to a dangerous, icy whisper. "You are playing checkers, and we own the board. Now get out of my office before I have my head of security throw you out." He dropped the legal documents on my desk and fled the room, his political armor and financial threats utterly shattered. He thought he could threaten my found family, but he forgot that I am a ruthless corporate mastermind. I would buy the entire global supply chain before I let him take my daughter. The heavy oak doors of my executive office clicked shut, leaving me alone in the sprawling silence of the penthouse suite. The biological father had just fled my office, his grand supply chain blockade utterly shattered by my preemptive acquisitions. It was a flawless victory on paper. I had anticipated his brute force attack and neutralized it before he even woke up that morning. But as I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the glittering skyline of the city, my sharp, calculating eyes narrowed. I should not celebrate a single one battle when the war is still raging. I mentally ran the projections. The biological father was humiliated, his political armor cracked, and his supply chains absorbed into my own empire. But men like him, those high society elites dripping in wealth but morally bankrupt, do not just surrender. They had billions of dollars tied up in deep, untouchable assets. I realized quickly that a standard legal war against a billionaire of this scale would take a decade. 10 years of endless court battles. Slowly, a mischievous, dangerous smirk spread across her face. She saw right through my villainous exterior and understood the absolute ruthlessness of my strategy. Together, we devised a master plan. "You want me to go back?" Hawu said, her voice dropping to a deadly calm whisper. "You want me to pretend the pressure broke us?" "Exactly," I nodded, keeping my tone perfectly cold and calculating. "I will stay behind to manipulate the external stock market, applying just enough pressure to keep the biological father distracted. Meanwhile, you will live under their roof. You will sit at their dinner table, sleep in their guest room, and systematically destroy them from the inside. They think they are bringing home a helpless pawn they can mold into a puppet. Let us show them what a queen does to a chessboard." Hawu leaned forward, resting her chin on her hands, her eyes burning with excitement. "I love it. I will pack my bags immediately. We will need an audience to make it convincing." The very next morning, we put on the performance of a lifetime. We alerted the press, ensuring that every major news outlet had cameras pointed directly at the entrance of our headquarters. Hawu stood on the polished marble steps with two large luxury suitcases. She was not wearing her sharp blazers or streetwear. Instead, she had dressed in something plain, something that made her look small and defeated. As the cameras flashed, she would pretend the pressure broke us, fake a tearful public surrender, and move back into the biological family's mansion. She wiped away fake tears, hanging her head in perfectly simulated shame, pretending that the sheer pressure of the corporate war had finally broken her spirit. A fleet of black luxury cars pulled up to the curb. The biological family had arrived to claim their prize. The biological father stepped out of his limousine, flanked by his arrogant son, Du Bin, and the perpetually manipulative fake heiress, Ju Bin. They looked entirely triumphant, puffing out their chests for the cameras. They honestly believed they had won. The biological father looked up at me where I stood at the top of the stairs. I made sure to look grim, my perpetually tired aura playing the part of a defeated man perfectly. He sneered, a disgusting look of victory on his face, as his bodyguards loaded Ha Wu's bags into the trunk. Ju Bin stepped forward, placing a comforting, entirely fake hand on Ha Wu's shoulder. "Welcome home, sister. The nightmare is over." Ha Wu sniffled, playing her part flawlessly, and let herself be guided into the back of the limousine. As the luxury convoy drove away, taking my daughter back into enemy territory, the reporters shouted questions at me. I ignored them all. I turned and walked back into my headquarters, adjusting the cuffs of my unbranded dark suit. I stayed behind to manipulate the external stock market from my penthouse. They thought they had finally defeated me. They thought they had reclaimed their lost daughter and secured their empire. They had absolutely no idea they had just opened their heavy iron gates and invited an apex predator directly into their home. The Trojan horse was securely inside the walls, and my ultimate evil victory was completely guaranteed. I could hardly contain my pride. The biological family brought Ha Wu into their massive, aggressively opulent mansion, genuinely thinking they could mold her into a puppet. They believed that pulling her away from my influence would break her spirit. Leaving her as a blank slate, they could easily control and parade in front of the media. I sat in my penthouse miles away, swirling a glass of sparkling water, watching my monitors as the digital trail of my master plan began to light up. They thought they had captured a helpless pawn, but they had absolutely no idea they had just seated an apex predator at their dining table. That evening, the biological family hosted a lavish family dinner to celebrate their supposed victory. The dining room was suffocatingly grand, featuring a long mahogany table covered in ridiculous silver candelabras and a feast large enough to feed a small army. Ha Wu sat quietly at the far end, playing the part of the defeated, intimidated daughter perfectly. Du Bin, her arrogant biological brother, sat across from her. He was practically vibrating with unearned superiority, dressed in flashy, recognizable luxury brands from head to toe. Beside him sat Du Bin, the delicate, doe-eyed fake heiress, wearing another expensive, frilly pastel designer dress. As the maids poured the wine, Du Bin immediately tried to establish dominance during the meal. "Make sure you watch which fork you use, sister," Du Bin sneered, taking a loud sip from his crystal glass. "This is not one of those cheap street stalls your fake father probably took you to. We expect proper etiquette in this house." Du Bin chimed in, putting on her absolute best pitiful victim act, her voice dripping with condescending sweetness. "Oh, Du Bin, do not be so harsh. She has had a very hard life living with that terrible man. We must be patient with her while she learns how civilized people behave. If you need me to teach you how to cut your steak, sister, just ask." Ha Wu did not react to their pathetic attempts at bullying. She kept her face entirely blank, radiating a deadly calm under pressure. While politely eating their expensive food, Ha Wu secretly used her phone resting on her lap to begin legally transferring their internal shares to my shell companies. Her thumbs moved with blinding speed and clinical precision. She was bypassing their internal security protocols, exploiting the access she had quietly secured the moment she connected to their home network. Block by block, share by share, she was systematically bleeding the biological family's corporate inheritance dry. I could see the transfers hitting my offshore accounts in real time. My corporate weapon was hollowing them out from the inside, and they were too busy gloating to even notice. However, the execution of the Trojan horse gambit came with its first major risk. Du Bin, hot-headed and deeply insecure, suddenly stopped chewing. He narrowed his eyes, highly suspicious of her completely calm demeanor. She was not crying. She was not intimidated. She was just staring at the glowing screen under the table. "What are you looking at?" Du Bin demanded loudly, slamming his fork down on his porcelain plate. "Are you texting that thug you call a father? Give me the phone. Now." The biological parent stopped eating and looked over. The tension in the dining room instantly spiked. If Du Bin saw the real-time stock transfers on her screen, our entire master plan would collapse right there at the dinner table. He stood up, leaning aggressively across the table, his hand outstretched to snatch the device from her grasp. "I said give me the phone." "Street rat," Du Bin ordered, his face turning red. Hawu did not panic. She did not flinch. With absolute brilliance, she seamlessly pivoted. In a fraction of a second, her thumb swiped across the screen, closing the stock transfer application and opening a completely different file. She casually lifted the phone and slid it across the smooth mahogany table right into Du Bin's waiting hand. "I was just reviewing some household expenses," Hawu said, her tone perfectly innocent with a sharp edge. "I wanted to understand the financial standard of my new family." Du Bin grabbed the phone and glared at the screen. He was expecting to find messages to me. Instead, Hawu was showing him a fabricated, horrifyingly high credit card bill under Du Bin's name. Du Bin's eyes widened. He relied entirely on his family's wealth, and any threat to his money made him instantly furious. The fabricated bill displayed an absolute fortune spent on luxury handbags, secret international spa trips, and diamond jewelry, all dated within the last 48 hours. $250,000, Du Bin screamed, voice cracking as he whipped his head toward Du Bin. "You spent $250,000 on designer bags yesterday, while our corporate accounts are supposedly frozen." Du Bin dropped her spoon, her doe eyes going wide with genuine panic. Because she was naturally desperate and greedy, the accusations sounded entirely believable. "What? No, I did not buy anything yesterday. Let me see that." "You selfish little parasite," Du Bin roared, throwing the phone back onto the table. "Dad is fighting a corporate war to save our empire, and you are secretly draining the emergency funds to buy pastel dresses." The biological father slammed his fist on the table, turning his wrath entirely onto the fake heiress. "Du Bin, is this true? I told you to freeze your discretionary spending." "It is a lie, she fabricated it." Du Bin shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Hawu, her pitiful victim act completely shattering into desperate panic. But she was prone to making stupid mistakes when backed into a corner, and her shrill screaming only made her look more guilty. Hawu had successfully deflected suspicion and planted the first massive seed of internal discord. As the biological family completely lost their minds, screaming at each other over the dining table, the internal structure of their household violently began to fracture. Hawu quietly picked up her fork, cut a piece of her perfectly cooked steak, and took a polite bite. She did not even look at them. Under the cover of their screaming match, she pulled the phone back toward her, swiped back to the hidden application, and continued transferring another 50,000 shares to my portfolio. My evil plan was executing flawlessly. Paranoia is a disease that naturally infects the corrupt. The biological parents, those high society elites who dripped in wealth but remained morally bankrupt, were entirely consumed by it. Even though they had successfully brought Hawu back into their opulent mansion, they did not trust her. They did not trust anyone. Their empire was under siege, their internal funds were mysteriously shrinking, and the screaming match from the previous night's dinner had left the entire household heavily on edge. To secure their domain, the biological parents made a completely predictable move. Still severely paranoid, they secretly hired a highly expensive private investigator to monitor the mansion's entire digital network. They wanted to see every text message, every email, and every hidden transaction occurring under their roof. They thought they were being exceptionally stealthy, setting a sophisticated digital trap for my daughter to fall into. But they forgot that I had raised a flawless corporate weapon. Ha Wu was sitting cross-legged on the plush bed of her guest room, casually sipping a cup of tea when she noticed a microscopic lag in her secure connection. She detected the private investigators network sniffer immediately. Because she had been trained by me and assisted by Mina for years, it took her less than 40 seconds to trace the monitoring software back to a surveillance van parked 3 blocks away from the estate. Most people would have panicked and stopped all their illicit activities, but Ha Wu remained deadly calm under pressure. Instead of hiding her tracks or disabling her connection, she saw the private investigator not as a threat, but as a highly convenient delivery system for her psychological warfare. While I sat in my penthouse miles away, manipulating the external stock market and watching her keystrokes through our encrypted backdoor, Ha Wu began to type. She deliberately fed the private investigator heavily doctored financial logs. She did not just create a few fake receipts. She painted a digital masterpiece of absolute corporate betrayal. She fabricated a massive trail of secure data that made it look exactly like Dubin was trying to liquidate the family's remaining physical assets to flee the country. She forged electronic signatures transferring millions from the biological father's emergency reserves directly into offshore accounts under Dubin's name. To sell the narrative completely, she even generated fake confirmation emails for a one-way private jet charter to a non-extradition country, scheduled for that very midnight. She bundled this glowing, radioactive package of fake data and let the private investigator capture it perfectly on his surveillance software. The fallout was instantaneous and utterly catastrophic. Less than an hour later, the heavy wooden doors of Dubin's private suite were violently kicked open. The biological father stormed in, his face a terrifying shade of purple with absolute rage. He was followed closely by his wife, who was hyperventilating with panic. Dubin, the arrogant heir, was lounging on his expensive leather sofa, scrolling aimlessly through his phone. He looked up, deeply insecure and completely confused by the sudden intrusion. "Dad, what is going on?" Dubin asked, dropping his phone onto the cushions. "You absolute traitor," the biological father roared, hurling a thick stack of printed financial logs directly at his son's chest. The papers scattered across the floor like dead leaves. "I am fighting a massive corporate war to save your inheritance, and you are secretly liquidating my emergency funds to flee the country." Dubin looked down at the papers. His eyes widened in absolute horror as he saw his own name attached to massive wire transfers in a private jet itinerary. He always panicked when confronted with actual data. "What?" Dubin screamed, his hot-headed nature instantly flaring up. "I do not even know how to transfer money out of the Cayman accounts. You know I do not know how to do that." The private investigator caught the transfers coming directly from your personal network address. The father shouted back, stepping closer and jabbing a furious finger at his son. "You cowardly little parasite. You were going to leave us to go bankrupt while you hid on a tropical beach." The family's internal structure violently collapsed, exactly as Hao had designed. The parents had completely turned on Dubin, stripping away the only thing he cared about, his unearned wealth and superiority. But Dubin, desperate and furious, needed a target. His mind immediately flashed back to the fabricated credit card bill from the dinner table the night before. He furiously blamed Dubin. "It is her," Dubin shrieked, his voice echoing down the massive hallways. "It is Dubin. She is the one who stole the emergency funds yesterday for her designer bags. She set this entire thing up to frame me because I caught her stealing." Dubin, who had been lingering in the hallway to watch the drama, gasped. She started weeping her fake, pitiful tears, desperately denying everything as she ran away. Because she was actually greedy and prone to making stupid mistakes, her denial sounded completely hollow. Within seconds, the three of them were screaming at the top of their lungs, tearing each other apart with vicious, greedy accusations. Down the hall, Hao casually stepped out of her guest room. She leaned against the marble doorframe, watching the biological family utterly destroy themselves. She smiled her bright, mischievous smile, totally unbothered by the chaos she had masterfully orchestrated. Back in my penthouse, I leaned back in my leather chair and took a sip of my instant coffee. The biological family's trust was dismantled. Their internal communication was shattered, and their assets were completely compromised. The Trojan horse had successfully burned their empire from the inside out. My found family had won the psychological war, and now it was time to execute the final checkmate. The biological father was a drowning man who was utterly convinced he was standing on dry land. Despite his family tearing itself apart over the fabricated financial logs, and despite his massive corporate empire bleeding capital from Hao's hidden transfers, his monumental arrogance blinded him to the truth. He believed his internal problems were simply the result of his incompetent son and his greedy fake daughter. He still thought he held the ultimate trump card in our corporate war. To end the conflict once and for all, the biological father called a massive public shareholder meeting. He rented out an enormous grand auditorium in the center of the financial district, inviting hundreds of major investors, high-ranking board members, and a swarm of national media outlets. His intention was brutal, aggressive, and entirely theatrical. He planned to use his reclaimed daughter as a highly visible public relations shield to protect her company in front of the entire world. I arrived at the venue precisely on time. I did not sneak in through the back doors or hide from the cameras. I walked right through the main entrance, wearing an impeccably tailored, unbranded dark suit projecting my perpetually tired, highly dangerous aura. Flanking me were my two most loyal operatives. Yuna walked to my left, intimidatingly flawless in a crimson business suit, carrying a single, slim leather briefcase. Instead, I simply took a seat in the front row, looking completely unbothered. I crossed my legs, leaned back, and gave him a slow, calculating smile. I am a mastermind, and I never enter a room unless I have already won the war. The biological father approached the heavy wooden podium, tapping the microphone. The massive room fell into a hushed, expectant silence. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed shareholders and members of the press, the biological father began, his voice booming with arrogant authority. We are gathered here today to witness the restoration of order. For 10 long years, my family has suffered a terrible tragedy. My true daughter was kept from me by a ruthless, manipulative corporate thug, a man who stole her, isolated her, and tried to use her as a weapon against her own blood. He paused, gesturing grandly toward Haowu. The cameras swiveled to capture her perfectly calm expression. But today, love and loyalty have prevailed. The biological father continued, placing a heavy, possessive hand on Haowu's shoulder. My daughter has returned to her rightful place. And now, as a united family, it is time to eradicate the infection that has plagued our market. Today, I am putting forward a motion for a massive, hostile acquisition of Min Wu's remaining corporate assets. We will crush his empire, liquidate his holdings, and wipe his name from the financial sector forever. The crowd erupted into shocked murmurs. It was a display of brute financial force, the exact kind of dirty tactic these high society elites relied upon. Dubin smirked arrogantly from his seat, and Dubin clapped politely, entirely convinced their family was about to secure absolute victory. I did not flinch. Yuna pushed her silver-rimmed glasses up her nose, her face completely deadpan as she treated the entire spectacle with complete corporate seriousness. Min let out a low, amused chuckle. I call this hostile shareholder meeting to order, the biological father announced, his chest puffed out with total triumph. And I call for an immediate vote. All in favor of destroying Min Wu's conglomerate, let it be known. The room held its breath. The biological father looked down at Haowu, fully expecting his perfectly reclaimed daughter to smile for the cameras and cast the first ceremonial vote. He believed his trap had closed on me. He had absolutely no idea that Haowu was sitting there, deadly calm under pressure, simply waiting for our own trap to spring. My evil plan was about to reach its glorious, devastating conclusion. The silence in the grand auditorium was absolute. The biological father stood at the heavy wooden podium, his chest puffed out with total arrogance, bathing in the flashing lights of the press cameras. He had just called for the final, devastating vote that would supposedly crush my corporate empire and erase my name from the financial sector. He looked out over the sea of shareholders and executives, waiting for the unanimous chorus of agreement that would cement his ultimate victory. I gave her a single, almost imperceptible nod. The general was giving his top operative the green light to drop the bomb. Hawu pulled her sleek smartphone from her pocket and plugged a small cable into the podium's main projection system. The massive digital display behind the biological family, which had been showing their corporate logo, abruptly flickered and changed. It was instantly replaced by a massive, highly detailed pie chart of the biological family's internal corporate holdings. I have a slight correction for the board, Hawu announced, her voice echoing through the massive auditorium with crystal-clear authority. Before we vote on any hostile acquisitions, we need to address a rather glaring administrative error regarding the ownership of this company. The biological father stepped toward her, his face flushing red. Hawu turned that screen off immediately. Security, remove her from the microphone. But no one moved. My head of security, Min, simply stood up from his seat in the front row, crossing his massive arms over his chest. I was more than enough to ensure that the building's rent-a-cop stayed firmly planted against the back walls. For the past week, I have been living in the family mansion, Hawu continued, perfectly projecting her voice. My biological family believed they had successfully reclaimed me. They thought I was a helpless pawn. But while Du Bin was throwing tantrums over his allowance, and while Du Bin was weeping about her frozen credit cards, I was quietly doing some administrative restructuring at the dinner table. She tapped her phone screen. The massive chart on the display shifted, showing thousands of microtransactions, wire transfers, and internal stock reallocations. I was legally transferring their internal inheritance and private shares to a series of blind shell companies, Hawu revealed, staring out at the shocked faces of the shareholders. Shell companies that I fully own and operate. The biological father stopped dead in his tracks, his jaw dropping in absolute horror as he looked back at the screen. Du Bin, sitting at the table, turned a sickly shade of white. He panicked completely when confronted with actual intellect and raw data. You see, my biological father called this meeting to crush Min Wu's company, Hawu stated, her tone turning cold and dripping with absolute financial dominance. But he cannot do that, because as of 8 a.m. this morning, those shell companies absorbed the final remaining block of internal family assets. She tapped the screen one final time. The pie chart slots consolidated into one massive block. The number 51.4% flashed in bold, undeniable red text next to Hawu's name. I am now the majority shareholder of this entire corporate empire, Hawu revealed, delivering the ultimate checkmate. The room erupted into absolute pandemonium. The press corps surged forward, cameras flashing like strobe lights. The shareholders began shouting over each other, realizing that the billionaire standing on stage no longer possessed any actual power. The biological father looked like he was going to have a heart attack. No, that is impossible. You cannot do this. I am the chairman. I am your father. Hawu turned to him, her expression entirely devoid of emotion. You threw me away to hide a scandal 10 years ago. You are not my father. You are a liability. And as the majority shareholder, my first official act is a restructuring of the executive board. You are officially fired. The biological mother, who had been completely silent and hyperventilating in the background, finally cracked. She lunged forward, her pristine high society mask shattered. You ungrateful little wretch, the mother shrieked, her voice cracking with desperation. We gave you life. You belong to us. Hawu did not even blink. She tilted her head, staring at the woman with absolute ice in her veins. You gave me DNA. Min Wu gave me an empire. Zhu Bin jumped up from the table, bursting into her classic, pitiful tears. She tried to play the victim one last time to maintain her stolen status. Sister, please, we are your family. Do not leave us with nothing. We love you. But the golden rule of our household is that the victim always loses. Hawu countered with cold, undeniable facts. You love my credit limit, Zhu Bin. Hawu deadpanned, shutting down the emotional manipulation instantly. You have exactly 48 hours to vacate the mansion before I bulldoze it to build a new data center. I suggest you start packing. The biological family was left with absolutely nothing. Their wealth, their empire, and their high society status were entirely vaporized by the very daughter they had discarded. They were screaming, crying, and turning on each other right there on the stage. A pathetic display of moral bankruptcy. Ha Wu did not stay to watch them drown. She unplugged her phone, turned her back on her biological family, and simply walked off the stage. She discarded them without a second thought. As she walked down the steps, the crowd parted for her like she was royalty. She walked directly up to me, stopping in front of my seat. The mischievous, playful spark returned to her bright eyes. The hostile takeover is complete, boss, Ha Wu smiled. Can we go home now? I think Min promised to let me win at Mario Kart tonight. Oh, and boss, do you think we can use their bankruptcy filings to build a new paper crown? My old one is getting a little worn out. I stood up, buttoning my unbranded dark suit. I maintained my cold, villainous exterior for the cameras, projecting the terrifying aura of a mastermind who had just flawlessly executed a 10-year revenge plot. Excellent work, operative, I said, my voice deep and intimidating. My evil plan has concluded perfectly. We will requisition the necessary construction materials tonight. But as Yuna handed me my briefcase, treating our total corporate dominance with complete deadpan seriousness, and Min fell into step behind us to shield us from the press, I felt a massive lump form in my throat. I was not a calculating monster. I was just a giant softy, secretly, fiercely protective, and deeply, overwhelmingly proud of my daughter. We walked out of the auditorium together, leaving the biological family in the ashes of their ruined empire. As we approached the executive elevator, Mina was waiting for us, twirling a completely unnecessary but highly intimidating hacker's flash drive with a mischievous smirk. Our entire found family was finally reunited. We returned to our penthouse, proving once and for all that true family is built entirely on loyalty, not